Breath of the Wild is phenomenal, but it has completely different strengths than the early top-down The Legend of Zelda titles. It's always fun to revisit the classics, and A Link to the Past is often considered one of the greatest classic Zelda entries. But for fans who have exhausted the Zelda library, there are plenty of similar games, with their own unique spins on the Link to the Past formula that are worth checking out. This list will focus on top-down action-adventure puzzle games, so any title that drifts too far into turn-based RPG territory or implements too many platforming elements will be excluded. A Link to the Past centers around overworld and dungeon exploration using simple combat, with RPG and puzzle elements found in the game's arsenal of usable items. More modern, Zelda-inspired games like Stardew Valley and Hob are worth playing, and they might scratch the Zelda itch, but they feel a bit too dissimilar in terms of mechanics. Early Zelda's simplicity may be partially due to the technological limitations of the time, but it ended up being uniquely charming when paired with its serene music and colorful visuals. There are plenty of runner-up games that are worth mentioning, but are slightly too critically polarizing to harp on. The Oceanhorn series, Evoland, and the Blossom Tales games all contain Zelda elements, and they'll definitely appease fans. That said, they're a major notch below A Link to the Past in terms of quality, so they may come off as pale modern imitations compared to their spiritual predecessor. These are the very best games like classic Zelda, but not BOTW, in no particular order. Alundra, this criminally underrated PlayStation title, debuted in 1997, and it is arguably on par with the best top-down Legend of Zelda games. It is Zelda-inspired graphics with PlayStation-level quality, and one of the dreamiest, most atmospheric soundtracks of its time. Its gameplay may be a bit too retro, but its story is shockingly creative and profound. Alundra follows a hero who can enter people's dreams and must help a village overcome a demon's curse by infiltrating the villagers' nightmares and helping them overcome their personal traumas. Alundra thoughtfully and tactfully explores dark, grounded themes like addiction, depression, and abuse, while perfectly balancing comedy and drama. Its fantastical, well-designed world is original, but reminiscent of Legend of Zelda's Hyrule, with a cast of colorful characters and intimidating bosses. Its dialogue is fun and surprisingly progressive, and the dream dungeons are wonderfully surreal, culminating in an edgier, more story-driven Legend of Zelda-like experience. Is 1, 2, 4, and 5 Nihon Falcom's Is series is considered one of the more influential RPG franchises, due mostly to its incredible music and an emphasis on storytelling that was rare at the time. Though the gameplay is not entirely Legend of Zelda-like, its fast-paced real-time combat is close enough to elicit nostalgia and handles well. Each subsequent title becomes slightly more mechanically Zelda-like with the exception of Is 3, which follows in Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link's Footsteps by being the series' only side-scroller. The underappreciated action RPG series Is follows a young adventurer named Adol as he explores the land of Asteria and its neighboring regions. Adol, who relentlessly craves danger and glory, is a Link-like protagonist who shares a character flaw that Link never addresses. His need for heroism harms his personal relationships and isolates him from those he protects. In its own way, it challenges the notion of a chosen hero and presents a uniquely tragic but often lighthearted take on the Legend of Zelda story. It'll Do is an indie adventure game that often pokes fun at Zelda's gimmicks. Though it is on the short side, its engaging hand-drawn graphics, entertaining writing, and clever puzzles make It'll Do one of the better Zelda-likes out there. The game, which basically functions as a parody of the Legend of Zelda series, puts players in control of a pair of heroes who find themselves on a mysterious island where they are unusually aware of their roles as protagonists of an adventure game. They puzzle solve, beat up NPCs, and steal all the loot they come across as they journey forth heedlessly through dungeons and cities. Though it's not particularly innovative or exceptional, it's a great adventure title that answers the unasked question, what if Link wasn't a great person? Tunic is a beautiful action-adventure title that could be a Zelda project if the series never transitioned to 3D gameplay. The fluid mechanics successfully bring A Link to the Past's dungeon-centric 2.5D gameplay into the present, complete with an expanding roster of items and skills. The graphics are picturesque, the music is atmospheric, and the puzzles are well designed. The simple narrative follows a fox who explores a breathtaking world on a quest to collect all the pages of the game's instruction manual. Tunic's main fault is in its combat, which has a less than satisfying difficulty curve and can't quite decide whether it wants to emulate Legend of Zelda or Dark Souls, but for players who want to take on the challenge, Tunic is one of the better modern Zelda-inspired titles. The Binding of Isaac, including a roguelike game, is a slippery slope, since most of the genre's top-down games use procedurally generated areas inspired by early Legend of Zelda dungeons. There are plenty of great roguelikes that give players the classic Zelda feeling, like Hades, Enter the Gungeon and Rogue itself, but Binding of Isaac may just be the very best. The title starts off as a twin-stick shooter that grows more complex as the player collects items and power-ups. Though the game's music and appearance are minimalist, the elaborate dungeons are incredibly satisfying and Zelda-like, implementing elements like secret rooms accessible by blowing up cracked walls, keys that unlock doors, and scattered in-game stores. The twisted, dark story centers around a boy named Isaac who escapes being sacrificed by his mother, only to find himself lost in his hellish basement. Since its release, it garnered a reputation for being one of the most important recent indie games. It should be noted, however, that The Binding of Isaac is substantially harder than any classic The Legend of Zelda, and its merciless permadeath system ensures that players will be nowhere near as relaxed as they would be playing A Link to the Past. However, any fans of the series who enjoy its dungeons above all else will find themselves at home in The Binding of Isaac's grotesque world.